All right, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health Mondays. I am Mind Runner, and my guest at this time, she has a master's degree in new media. She is a world-renowned presenter all over the world. She is a wrestling journalist and presenter, most notably at Mission Pro Wrestling, where she was given 4.5 stars by Dave Meltzer, 5.5 at the Tokyo Dome. She is a lifestyle influencer and multilingual content creator. She has been seen at many wrestling events all over the world, including North Carolina. You may know her as the FDT, but she is my guest at this time, Xenia. I don't have dancing girls with rooms, so instead we're going to go with Danhausen and a shovel. All right. Well, there you go. Xenia,
wow, you
welcome.
You have to send me like the script of this, because this is the best I've ever been introduced, probably.
I will send you just that clip, because that'll be there. Well, I'm super excited because, again, like I promised my non-wrestling fans, this is not a wrestling podcast, but just be forewarned. Here's the banner. Yes, of course, but we are definitely going to be talking some wrestling because it brings us both joy. And I think that talking about things that bring, what's that? Yeah, just a little bit, right? Exactly. We can't help it. But you got to celebrate the things that bring you joy, right?
Absolutely.
So thank you for being here, Xenia. I'm glad my people and your people got together and we finally were able to chat. And I know that both of us, I think, kind of were like, oh no, we got to get out of our pajamas and jump on the interview. I know that I was kind of dragging this morning myself. I'm like, oh no, I need some coffee. So I want to talk to you.
I'm in my Zoom mode right now, dressed up from the waist up.
Yeah, right. Hey, when the pandemic happened, how many of us were, from waist up, we're all glam, but then we got our underpants and shorts and flippers on. I know that was that's kind of how we are. I'm real excited because you're like an international influencer who's specifically wrestling journalist. And one of the things I love about your interview style when you interview wrestlers, and this is something I think you even noted on your website, you don't just talk to people you don't give them the generic questions. You don't give them the, what's your favorite match? Who's your dream opponent? Blah, blah, blah. You really go in depth in the person. And I think that's not just with wrestlers, but with any interview, I think that's so important. And is that kind of a passion, or is that on purpose that you want to go to the person, not the wrestler?
That is absolutely on purpose. And you're right. I do have it noted on my website that I call them turnkey interviews. Because I try to kind of steer away from the classic wrestling interview. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but no. I just feel like for talent especially, they're a little overused and the questions get a little repetitive. So I just want to give something new, but I also want to give something unique because we're all humans first, and there's more to us than wrestling, to every one of us. And I just kind of always wanted to tap more into that, because ultimately what kind of human you are shapes what kind of a performer you are too. And I just feel like it gives such a nice glimpse into the motivation of the person, into the background of the person, into their worldview. And I've talked about the most random things in my wrestling interviews. Like I've talked to Sean Ross Sapp about rescuing cats. I've talked to Sean Dean about his experience in the military. I've talked to Chuck Taylor about Russian deathmatch. Like there's no limits to where the topic can take you, and I just think it's beautiful, and I just think it's very, very interesting to watch interviews like that, because if you're a fan of a certain wrestler, right, you probably know everything about them in terms of wrestling, right? Like, right,
Hmm.
you know the highlights of their career, you know their best matches, you know their strong points, but maybe you don't know what their childhood cat's name was, and I'm here
Yeah.
to tell you that.
No, that's brilliant. And that's because there's a lot you can just learn on cagematch.com, or go to a website and look it up. But like finding out what their childhood cat's name. I mean, and getting to know the person, I think is huge. It's interesting too because of new media. That's your master's degree in new media. And how is that kind of, it sounds like a really cool, maybe very, very opportunistic, not say opportunistic, but a degree that could really open a lot of doors, especially now with everything changing in technology, social media, Twitter's now X, and there's all these advancements in new media. Is that something that that you're diving into with your brand?
Yes, for sure. New media is what my master's degree is in, actually, and it definitely gave me a good look into what the uh, modern realm of marketing looks like, pretty much, and what the modern realm of producing and consuming content is like. Because, and I actually talk about that a lot in my social media, that a lot of people don't realize that we live in the age of social media, and there's nothing you can do about it. People like to try to run away from it. People like to try and deny it, or live with some sort of a different picture of the world. But ultimately, it's something that we all have to take into account in everything we do. And my master's thesis was actually about social media in China, which is even more progressive and even more uh, advanced than it is in America or in Europe or wherever. And yeah, it's definitely helped me shape my product, and it's definitely helped me shape what I do, because I have a very consistent presence on almost all types of social media, and it's helped me present my product in a way too. Because actually, there was some discourse on Twitter/X this week about talent getting paid to be on podcasts, and I wrote a very long post about it's not black and white, about how sometimes a podcast is a product, sometimes a podcast is a service, sometimes it
Hmm.
makes even more sense for people or talent or products that are being featured on the podcast to pay the podcaster, because
Hmm.
it's providing them exposure, it's providing them a service. But also some other times, like the person in question, when the problem started, when they have 150 followers, it absolutely makes zero sense for talent to even appear on the podcast, even if they're getting paid. It's just not, it's just not efficient for them. And
Hmm.
a lot of people, I feel, don't understand, or like don't try to look at it in depth like that. People just think, oh, all these podcasters are the same and it's whatever, and they're wasting my time. But it's absolutely not the case, because any type of self-employed or contractor talent rely fully on PR to have their work,
Hmm.
and to have their fan base. So the podcasts and the YouTube channels and the social media is a very, very important component of the world of wrestling and of how wrestlers, quote unquote, get over. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely helped me have a bit of a different worldview in a sense in what I do.
I think that's tremendous. I feel very, again, looking at it from multiple sides. As a podcaster, I see it as through the podcasting lens, but also it's content that it's mutual content too. The way I see it is a lot of, especially independent wrestlers who they're trying to get their name out, they're trying to get over. It's they have now, there's media content, and it's I think it's good for young up and coming talent, whether it's wrestling or any industry, to get this kind of practice, because it and almost, and again, it, like you said, all you to say that all podcasts are the same, is that's a huge fallacy, and not just in status but also in quality too. I mean, there's a million wrestling podcasts out there, but a lot of but not all of them are the same. They all have, a lot of them have different personalities, they treat the talent different. Some of them are much more about themselves, some of them are about the guest. What's cool about talent, I think, is, and I don't know if you, I want to know if you agree about this, is that like if a wrestler does a podcast, they also now have something that for their portfolio that they can say, hey, this is how I am in an interview. So then like maybe another media organization might see how they are and go, oh, okay, they handled themselves pretty good. Or, oh, okay, this is more about them. And to me, it feels like it's another piece that a talent can use as well to say, hey, this is me, getting the word out there. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. And whenever I encounter a wrestler who proactively reaches out to podcasts and who proactively reaches out to get interviewed, I always get, bonus respect for that person, because to
Mhm,
me that tells me that the person understands how social media works and understands
mhm.
how promoting yourself works. And promoting yourself is extremely important. And Matt Cardona actually talks a lot about that. And
Yes.
he says wrestlers should make their own money, should be in charge of their own income and of their own presentation. And he does also acknowledge that it's easier for him to say as an ex WWE guy, but it's also true that the indie promotions and the indie wrestling fans are not following him as Zack Ryder. They're following him as Matt Cardona, the indie god,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
so many ex WWE wrestlers get willingly or unwillingly stuck in their WWE presentation, and that's what
Mhm.
they get booked for, and that's what they kind of ride on for years after. But he's really not the case. And yeah, it's definitely very important for wrestlers to have a grasp of their social media presence and to be in control of it. That's exactly what makes Matt
Mhm.
Cardona different. He's in control of it. He has his own platforms, has his own podcast. He doesn't rely on other people giving him social media presence, giving him social media exposure. He does it himself. And that to me is a marker of a person who absolutely is set out for success and who is very successful currently also.
Yeah, kayfabe. He's a huge heel and boo and all that, but kayfabe aside, he is the indie king, the indie god, and what he's doing with Steph Delander now is tremendous. He's not only repackaged, remarketed himself, but he's proof that you can be successful on the indies now. Now, a lot of that I think has to do with the combination of social media, also having AEW and WWE. you know, I think we're kind of in a wrestling renaissance. There's a lot of eyes on independent wrestling too. But he's absolutely right. I mean, it comes with a lot of hard work. But you look at guys like Matt Cardona, Joey Janela, you look at Bussy, you look at a lot of these folks where you know you they're getting notoriety, they're getting noticed, and in some cases it's eventually leading to some actual, like when Masha Slamovich got signed to Impact. I was so thrilled because Masha was so deserving of getting a spot somewhere, and she's such a hardcore talent, and I thought that was tremendous that she got there. But like you look at like leaving an AEW or leaving WWE, doesn't seem like it's a death sentence anymore, and not even being in with a major company now, but you can market yourself through social media. Hey everyone, I want to pause the multiverse and take a break from diving deep into mental health and human nature to tell you about some friends of mine at King Ari Press. Are you an aspiring author looking for the next step but confused with how to get published? Or maybe you're struggling with a writer's block that you need to overcome? Or maybe you have some questions or concerns about how to get published or how to market your writing out there to get your masterpiece on the shelves. Well, look no further than my friends at King Ari Press. Go to kingaripress.com, and they are an independent publisher with the flexibility to engage in multiple phases of the writing journey. They're here to elevate authors like you and get as many doors open for authors as possible. Instead of the bottleneck of major publishing companies, King Ari Press is looking to get you on the shelves. That's kingaripress.com. One more door open, one more story told. It's time to tell your story. Anyways, let's get back to solving the world's problems one podcast at a time. I am Mind Runner, and let's get back to the other me and my awesome guest, Right. What are some things that you keep in mind when you're having an interview with somebody, and what are some things that you try to avoid with your interview subjects, or is it anything goes?
It's definitely not anything goes. It's
Mhm.
definitely being a journalist. The ethics of it is a huge factor. It's very, very important. And a lot of people like to hate on Sean Rossap, but I also feel like he is one of like of the very good examples of it.
Mhm.
Um, from what he's told me during our interview and just in real life, is as much as Fightful is very much the scoop-based, news-based website, they don't report on anything that's not confirmed, or if it's not confirmed, they do say that it's a rumor or that like a source claims, but they don't know for sure. And they don't report on anything legal related unless there's a police report, unless there's actual documentation to fall back on. Like it's very
Mhm.
important. And for me, ethics are, like I said, super important because my interviews and my content is a little bit more on the personal level than a
Mhm.
news website would be. So definitely my big thing is I never ask wrestlers about their personal life, about their dating life, that kind of stuff. And also before the interview, I don't necessarily ask what not to talk about, because as a journalist it's also very important to understand that sometimes it's your job to ask the question and it's their job to tell you I can't answer the question, but at least you've asked the
Mhm.
question, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily tell them that like, oh, you can ask me not to ask, but I do say that if I ask you a question and you're uncomfortable with it or you don't want to answer it, you tell me right away, and we drop the question, and you tell me if you want me to cut it out of the video or if you're okay with me keeping it. I think it's definitely very important to respect talent like that and to not be um, how some journalists like they would do anything to get someone to say something interesting. Like I'm definitely not that kind of person. I definitely want talent to feel comfortable, partially, like I said, because I do see my interviews as a service that they can
Mhm.
offer talent, because ultimately it goes to showcase their best assets. It goes to give them a platform to talk about things that they think are important to talk about.
Yes.
A lot of them include a lot of like social issues and like gendered issues and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So it's definitely very important to be careful with all of those. I did have a couple moments in my career where I sat down to interview a wrestler and I realized that some of the things that they're saying might be harmful and that some of the things that they're saying might be misinformation. And I've had to face myself, the question of, do
Yeah.
I keep this in the video? Do I even release the video? I've had to a couple
It's
times
a
add
tough
a
call.
subtitle that says XDT doesn't agree with the views expressed in this interview. Yeah, because
Uh,
it's one thing to be in disagreement, and I think it's perfectly fine to disagree with people. And we have different opinions, different views, but some things are just like straight up harmful. I mean, it's impossible to agree
I
on
know.
everything. But yeah, like I said, if it's something that's like hateful, I would
Mhm.
either drop the interview or cut it out or put the subtitle that like we don't agree with it. But other than that, like I said, when it comes to disagreements, my platform is a safe space for all kinds of peaceful opinions to be expressed.
That's good. That's good. What how important is it to have a thick skin in the entertainment business though? Because it does seem like that you have to have a thick skin, and because just because when you're putting yourself out there, you're a lot of times you're getting a no. And it's but not just a thick skin with the business, but with fans as well.
It's definitely very important, and it's something that I actually talk about a lot because for me, it's about this like precarious balance between
Mhm.
like this comes with the job, like a certain
Mhm.
amount of people that dislike you, a certain amount of people who are going to have mean things to say, and a certain amount of people who disagree with you very vehemently. That comes with the job, but also just because it's something that other people experience, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're supposed to just handle it and that you're supposed to
Mhm.
just be able to live with very hateful comments or threats or people telling you to go and live yourself. That kind of stuff happens too.
Mm.
And I always say that while it's important to have that thick skin and to try to separate your life on the internet from your real life and to realize that those people are trolls, for the lack of a better word, and that they're not going to harm you in any real way, but it's also important to shine a light on that. It's also important to show that, hey, this is what I experienced as a female creator in pro wrestling, or elsewhere, or in any other industry, and these things are not okay to say. And a lot of the time I would share screenshots without covering their names when I think they're being malicious, when I think it's said out of hate, and I just want them to experience maybe a crumb of consequence, and for them to see that it's actually not okay. And when you expose it to a larger group of people, people are going to be repulsed by that. People are not going to
Mhm.
say it's a normal thing to say to another person. So yeah, like I said, as much as it's important to have a thick skin, it's also important to know and remind yourself that just because you're in this position, just because you're in a position where you have a following, in a position when you're expressing opinions on a public platform, just because you're in that position doesn't mean you are supposed to just take abuse. That's
That's true.
never okay.
That's true. And do you agree that a lot of people sometimes forget that free speech doesn't mean free of consequences? Like, you can speak your mind, but hey, it doesn't mean everybody's got to just accept what you say.
Yes, absolutely. People, yeah, you're right. People think that when we say free speech, it means to just go and say and do anything, and especially doesn't mean go to that person and tell
Right.
them what you think about them when they absolutely did not ask you.
Do you think social media has made things a bit worse or better or both? Like, the access that everybody has now where they can tag somebody on Twitter and say, I don't like you, rather than just in the past where it was those voices weren't as prevalent. It's almost like I always like to say every village has an idiot, but now all the village idiots have a solid voice. They can get together on Twitter and and all make a big noise, so it's I don't know, do you think that social media has as a net benefit, and how do you manage? I mean, like, Nyla Rose is the queen of handling trolls on Twitter. I mean, she is the champion, undisputed, I think. But how do you handle
Sure.
the trolls, and is it more toxic with the amount of access that just some random possibly mentally challenged negative person has on social media?
Yeah, first of all, just quick shout out to Nyla Rose. You mentioned her. She's amazing. She's a good friend and she's absolutely amazing performer. And I did do an interview with her that's up on my channel currently, youtube.com/at Xenia did that. Check it out.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's a good question because I feel like a lot of the time people like to blame everything on social media. People like to be like, oh, back in my day, we read books and watched TV and didn't spew hate at each other on social media. I honestly feel like being in disagreement and also at times being aggressive about being in disagreement is very much human nature. I don't think social media changed anything in that regard. I just feel like maybe back in the day you wouldn't necessarily know that someone went and said that you were ugly or horrible or stupid, you know.
Mhm.
But what social media definitely did do is it gave people a sense of like a lack of a consequence, you know.
Mhm.
That's definitely something that's happened. And I always say that, like, all these people on the internet who say these things about me, they would absolutely not come up to me and say that to my face,
Yeah.
or they absolutely would not say that about a jacked 6 foot guy. You know. But one thing I like to joke about is that one thing that they do not know is that in real life I am also 6 foot and very intimidating. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I literally I have had people on the internet be like, wait till I see you at the show. And then I look at their profile and I'm like, bro, you're like 5'3". Like, what are you gonna do? You know?
Right. Hey,
Like,
do you have a
I'm
you
not,
should have
just
a
for the record,
finishing
not
move.
trying to shame anyone for their height, just saying that, like, I've gotten threats. Yeah, I've gotten threats from like the most unthreatening people in the world. Um, but it gives them the sense of depersonalization. It gives them like more distance between them and the person that they're trash talking, and they feel like they can just say anything and nothing will come of it,
You're gonna
because
squash
most
them
of the
like
time nothing will come of it.
you're gonna squash them
And
like
it's
a bug.
definitely something that gives people more Well, I'm okay. I oppose violence. I would never
Yes.
also do anything to anyone. I'm a lover, not a fighter. Uh, I'm also not trying to intimidate anyone. I do look intimidating sometimes, I think, but I'm not trying to be. What I'm saying is, yeah, people definitely feel like they can just say anything because they're behind the screen and because you can't reach them, because you can't, you know, do anything through the screen, and that part of it's definitely true.
You,
What can we do about it? I honestly don't know. The wrestling community is pretty tightly knit, so it definitely helps that a lot of those online conflicts do end up spilling out to the real life, and people do end up seeing you in real life, and then they get scared and don't say anything to you. So
yeah, and I'm again, I'm not trying to promote violence either. We're totally not promoting violence, but you know, you have the right to defend yourself if somebody comes up and tries anything with you. You definitely have the right to you know give them a power slam or give them the one winged angel. The it's interesting too because I've seen in some of your recent tweets too talking about like how how social media, some people are struggling, like some guys really just don't understand what women look for in a man, and vice versa, and how there seems to be some people they think some guys, I think they're complimenting you, but it comes across as like a backhanded like there was one somebody else tweeted, they showed where the guy was trying to be complimentary, but I'm reading this thing and I'm like, this what is this guy saying? What are some of your pet peeves or misconceptions that you want to dispel that it seems like a lot of, well, I'll just say guys on the internet, they don't represent the male gender completely. I will say that their views do not represent most of us. But what are some of those almost cringy, misconceptions that you've seen that you want to just say, listen, guys, this is not how it is.
this is such a good question, and thank you for asking it because I rarely ever talk about it because there's like such a fine line between complimenting a woman and making her uncomfortable, and I don't really talk much about that on like the public platforms
Mhm,
because I don't want to come across, ungrateful.
mhm,
Because one thing I want to say is I really, really appreciate all of my followers and every comment or message that they get, like telling me I'm pretty or telling me I'm doing a
mhm,
good job or telling them they liked my video. I immensely appreciate every single one of those. And I immensely appreciate anyone who takes time out of their day to look at my content and to support me. So that's why I hate to be like nitpicky about what people say because I don't want to come across ungrateful. But one thing that's a big pet peeve is when people, like you said, yeah, mostly men actually, think they're complimenting you, but they're saying something that's like way too personal. You know how sometimes I would get a message saying like, "Oh, my future wife," from someone I've never ever talked to,
mhm,
or someone saying, "Ooh, I want to hold your hand, I want to kiss you." Like those I really really hate because I have a decent amount of followers on social media, so I get a decent amount of messages and comments every single day,
mhm,
and it gets overwhelming in itself. Which again, I think it's an amazing thing, and I'm super grateful for it. But it does get overwhelming sometimes. And comments like that, when I feel like, again, I know those people are not being malicious at all. I know they're expressing appreciation, but it's just the way that they choose to express it that feels like it's overstepping a boundary, and
mhm,
that it feels like it makes me feel like violated almost. It's like,
mhm.
I've never met this person in my entire life. They've maybe like commented on my videos twice and they say, "Oh, I want to hold your hand, I want to kiss you." It just makes me feel violated. It makes me feel a little gross.
I'm not
Like
sure.
like I said on Twitter, makes me want to peel my skin off because I
I'm not
just feel like
sure.
so many people are trying to like get a piece.
I'm not sure these guys really understand like what they're saying. Like if that's, I mean, if they tried to use those lines in real life, they would get a drink in their face or slapped or, I mean, and just in general, even like people that aren't hitting on you. But do you find sometimes that like do do you find some people not take you as seriously as they should in certain ways? And like, is it a gender thing? Is it there's like, well, you know, like for example, you like Denise Salcedo, Sam Laterna. You're these are female interviewers that are great at what you do, and
Mhm.
yet is that always kind of, is that sometimes something you feel like you have to overcome with some other people in the industry that, hey, take me seriously, don't, and my gender doesn't have anything to do, or I am who I am as an interviewer. Do you find that is that ever become an issue, or is it something that you manage?
No, it's definitely a gender issue and definitely happens a lot. One thing I've noticed a lot is sometimes I'll express an opinion and I would get like a very negative response, but then I'll see a male journalist or a male influencer say pretty much the same thing and they get a completely different reaction because wrestling is an industry is still very male dominated even though we're
Mhm,
working towards making it more inclusive for non-men.
mhm,
uh, a lot of the times when a male influencer says something, the train of thought for the followers is, okay, I might not initially agree with this, but I respect this person, they've had valid opinions so far, they're a person I look up to or a person whose opinion I value. So let me like sit with this and let me think about this, and maybe what they're saying is actually valid. But if I were to say the same thing, the initial reaction, oh, this stupid girl, you know,
mhm,
it's definitely a thing, and it's definitely. Unfortunately, a lot of women in the industry, like you mentioned, Denise Salcedo and Sam Literna and Alicia Dowd and Emily May Heller and
mhm.
Ella Jane, so many amazing women in the industry. I could go on. Unfortunately, for us to be taken seriously, we have to almost work twice as hard, almost put in twice the effort to be taken as professionals, to be knowledgeable, to be present, to be a valuable asset to the community. So we unfortunately have to almost like put in twice the effort. Um, and for me also another, well, issue, quote unquote issue, I don't know, problem, uh, is I think part of it is not just the gender thing, part of it is my presentation, because I present pretty feminine. I have, blown hair, I have big lips, I have my nails done, I have lashes, everything. And people, not even just men but also women sometimes, associate certain traits with a certain type of
Mhm.
person. So people take one look at me and they think shallow, they think unintelligent, they think something else, bimbo, whatever. And I did, think about that. And being in a public light, you almost think about solving those issues. It's almost like, how can I be perceived differently, And I always joke, like, actually, I wear glasses sometimes, not all the time. Um, and I joke sometimes when I put them on, I go just so that people think I'm smarter,
There's
and
nothing wrong
it's
with
a joke, but
glasses,
it's
by the
also
way.
not a joke. But I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I just realized that yeah, and I just realized that I like the way I look, and I look this way because I want to look this way. Like I
Mhm.
put my makeup on a certain way, I do my hair a certain way, I dress a certain way because I like it and because it makes me feel like me. So I realized that I wasn't ready to compromise, that I wasn't ready to drop that just so that I'm perceived differently. So I'd rather just try and do my work, and through the means of my content, of how I speak, of what opinions I hold, of how I interact with people, what I put out into the world, I'd rather try and have that speak for me instead of changing what I look like just to make people perceive me differently.
I think a lot of people, they fall into their own preconceptions and stereotype mentality, and that's got to drive you nuts as a inclusion advocate, which I think is tremendous because as I'm also a teacher and I really try to teach my students to accept everybody for
Mm.
who they are as an individual, and not try to see people through certain lenses or certain stereotypes. And I think it's tremendous. To you, what does it mean to be an inclusion advocate, and what are some of your core motivations in advocating for inclusion, not just in wrestling, but in social media and just in the world in general?
Yeah, there's definitely two parts of it for me. The first part is the one that comes from my personal experience. And I'm a feminist and I'm a big believer in women's rights and the inclusion of women. And like you mentioned, even outside of wrestling, I've done public talks at universities. I've spoken on rape culture. I've spoken on, uh, just the ways that like the legal systems are not fair to women and the way that women are quote unquote invisible people to um, technology as well, which is very interesting, but also daunting, but also scary.
Hmm.
And for me, the core motivation is just my own life experience, which I recognize it's not the worst out there at all. I am definitely privileged in a lot of ways. I'm a white woman. I'm a cis woman. I'm a woman in a progressive European country right now. But having grown up in Eastern Europe, having grown up in a very, very patriarchal society, and having had those experiences, it's definitely, I definitely think my like ethnic background shaped my feminism to be a little more radical than an average person's would be. um, and it's definitely something that I believe in sharing with the world and sharing my perspective. And like we were mentioning, even through exposing people who are rude to women on the internet, or be it through delivering public talks, or be it through my content. I do have non-wrestling related feminist
Hmm.
videos on my channel also, where I explain some topics in simple terms, which I think are pretty like nice and digestible for the
Hmm.
general viewer. But the second part of it is the one that has nothing to do with my experience, and the one where I would love, and I try to do that, to provide a platform for people who do experience injustices to speak about it. Um, that's when I bring, wrestlers or not wrestlers or talent on my channel
Hmm.
and give them space to talk about it. Because I have no idea what it's like to experience racism. I have no idea what it's like to experience transphobia as a trans woman, right? Because I'm a cis woman. And so I want to bring people on and give them a safe space to talk about it, but also give them a platform for it to be heard by more people. So it's definitely those two parts that create the way that I try to advocate and
It would be
further
great
inclusion for wrestling, but
if
also
you're
beyond.
it'd be great if you're starting kind of the trend to really, because I feel like we're heading towards kind of a global community. We're already there kind of. And what I see a lot of times, and not just in the United States but in the world, you know, I see a lot of different cultures kind of trying to coexist. And now we're kind of like, because there's cultures that really still treat women like the 1800s or 1600s. There's a lot of cultures that that have very, I want to say, just different perspectives on gender and other and sexual orientation and transgender. And it seems like that you're being an advocate, which is tremendous. Like, if we have a lot more journalists like yourself, I think we can really get those stories out there and start to have a lot of these cultures start to, and it may be take some generations before we truly get there. But I think the more we share stories, this is one of the reasons I created Mental Health Mondays, is I want to get so many stories out there that we stop seeing othering each other. We stop seeing each other as others, and we start seeing each other as humans that all have different points of view and perspectives, because I feel like we're a lot more similar than we are different. And do you see us moving towards a more positive kind of global culture, or do you see it getting a little bit more violent, or you're getting a little bit more uncomfortable as we kind of learn to coexist globally?
Yeah, so one thing about progress and about societies growing is that, and we have to really remember that, is that it's not linear. It's not like we
Mhm.
can do, uh, we can work on inclusion, we can do something, and we can start a positive trend, and it will just continue growing in that direction forever. Like, unfortunately, that's not how it works. Unfortunately, say women's rights in Iran are at pretty much an all-time low, even though
Mhm.
in the 70s and 80s, Iran was one of the more progressive countries when it came
Yeah.
to women's liberation and education and freedom of choice. Now it's not so. And then in a lot of Eastern European countries, even like 10 years ago, the state of things for the LGBTQ plus community was so much better than it is right now. But then even in the realm of wrestling, right, we see so much more inclusion these days, and we see inclusion for women, we see inclusion for LGBTQ plus community, we see inclusion for people of different ages and different backgrounds. Because say like 10 years ago when Millie McKenzie was starting out and she was the first like sensation, the 16-year-old girl in the locker room, there were so many
Mhm.
talks about how wrestling is not a safe environment for her. Wrestling is not a safe
Mhm.
environment for a 16-year-old girl. But now we have Billy Starks. Now we have so many
Yeah.
female wrestlers who are
Izzy
starting out
Moreno.
super young, who are training, who are treated wonderfully, and no one questions whether it's their place to be there.
Yeah, is all right. We're gonna take a quick break from solving all of the world's problems to tell you about a good friend of mine and a service she's offering. Are you tired of feeling like your dream financial future is out of reach? Are you struggling with overwhelming debt, trying to pay off your home early, or simply wanting to give more? Well, my good friend Vanessa Rudder Jackson is here to help. An educator and military veteran, Vanessa is here to guide you through the confusion and make your dream financial future a reality. With her certified financial coaching services, she'll help you create a personalized plan that sets you up to win with money. As an educator and a mother of two, Vanessa understands the challenges of scraping by and stretching paychecks. She's been there, and she knows how to navigate the financial landscape to help you thrive. Don't let financial stress hold you back any longer. Take the first step towards financial freedom today with Rudder Jackson Financial Coaching. Reach out to Vanessa today for a free 45-minute consultation at varudder34@gmail.com or go to tinyurl.com/RJ Money Coach. That's varudder34@gmail.com or tinyurl.com/RJ Money Coach. Remember, it's never too late to take control of your finances and achieve your dreams. Start your journey to financial freedom with Rudder Jackson Financial Coaching today. All right, now let's get back to solving the world's problem with the most charming host on the interwebs. I feel like we're in almost a women's wrestling golden age now, and you can argue where that started. Some people like to say that with with Paige, now Saraya, and the women's evolution in WWE, but it feels like we've come a long way from the Attitude Era of bra and panty matches, which I don't want to say that it's wrong. If a woman wants to celebrate their body, I'm totally fine with that if that's what they want to do. But when that was the only kind of women's wrestling that was on, meanwhile, you had Jazz, you had these tremendous athletes, Ivory, and I felt like those are wrestlers. And I come from watching the Glow wrestling from the 80s and being a huge wrestling fan, women's wrestling fan, and now like with Mission Pro Wrestling, a lot of those independent female focused wrestling promotions, of which you were a guest announcer and did a tremendous job.
Yes.
I think that was
Thank
fantastic.
you.
But do you see us kind of getting away from the typical, like like women's wrestling was kind of the popcorn match? Because I'm seeing some of these women's matches that are putting the guys to shame or making the guys step up. There's some of these women's like just Masha Slamovich versus La Rosa Negra was one of my all-time favorite matches from Mission Pro of all time, and they've done it. They're up there with like Penta and Moxley.
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't know. I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but I don't know if I agree that we're in the golden age of women's
Okay.
wrestling. Because on the one hand, do I feel like we've come a very long way from the Brian
Hmm.
Penta matches? Yes, absolutely.
Hmm.
And do I feel like maybe in terms of the pool of the talent that's out there, we're in the
Hmm.
golden age? Yes, absolutely, 100%. And especially like the media recognizes that too. This year we saw Pro Wrestling Illustrated, instead of doing a women's top 150, now it's top 250,
Hmm.
because there's just a lot of women who are doing great, who are killing it on the scene. And like you said, in terms of talent currently, absolutely on par with the men, 100%. Like I couldn't like, there's no loss of quality when it comes to women's
Mhm.
wrestling at all. But uh, there's always a but. Um,
But
Unfortunately for the big companies, unfortunately for the big
yeah,
leagues, the women's matches are still the popcorn match, and it's a very mild, nice way to put it. The popcorn match. I say the pee break match,
I,
because like one thing that I do as a woman and as someone who advocates for women's wrestling, whatever show it is, whatever promotion it is, I make a point to never leave during the women's match, because a lot of people will. Because
yeah.
well, if I can pick another one to get popcorn during, I will do it. So I try to stay in the building during the women's match. But one thing that I've noticed that the big companies do, and we're not going to name drop, but we both know what companies I'm referring to.
Mhm.
Uh, a
There's
lot of
an
the time
elite
they would
one and
do,
there's a wrestling
not
entertainment
only
one.
is the Yeah, there's the entertaining one. That's mostly the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, uh, a lot of the time, not only will the women's match on the card, and I say the women's match on the card because mostly it's
Yeah.
one women's match on the card. So most of the time, not only will the women's match on the card be the one that's had the least build and the one where the stakes are the lowest. So how can you blame a fan for leaving the room for that match in particular? But one thing I've noticed that I really hate is that a lot of the time those bigger promotions would put the women's match in the P break spot in the card.
Yes.
They will put it after a title match. They will put it after a very intense long match. Like you can't treat women's matches like that, give them the least build, give them the least time, give them the least importance, and put them in the P break spot in the card, and then be like, well, look at that. People don't want to watch it. People are leaving. It doesn't work like that. You can't turn it on the fans. It is not the fans' fault. There's always, in building something and in promoting something that might be less popular, there's always sacrifice. You always have to maybe cut a men's match. You maybe cut it a little shorter, or maybe be prepared that the ratings will drop a little bit when you start building the women's storylines, but then they'll go back up because they will gain more importance. Like it's always something that has to be done in terms of like, you can't just go like this and everything brings you money. When you try
Mhm.
to build a marginalized talent, you have to put certain sacrifice in it. And another thing is like the percentage of women's matches. Like I said, it's still
Mm.
very much so, for not even just for the larger promotions, for most promotions it will be one women's match on the show. And also, as much as I advocate for intergender wrestling, I absolutely love it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Sometimes the promoters will even put an intergender match on the card and treat it as a reason to ditch a fully women's match. That's another thing
Yes.
that happens. Um, but even with that, like, I've also, like, as a journalist, I've been to press conferences and including those larger companies, and I've asked this question, and this question gets evaded most of the time. I ask in pretty simple terms, like, um, are we, can we expect a fairer percentage of matches on the show when it comes to women's matches versus men's matches? And the answer that I'm usually given is, well, yeah, we're trying to build women's storylines. We're putting it as main events when it makes sense. And it has to make sense and there has to be a story. Well, whose job it is? It's their job to make it
Absolutely.
make sense and to make it be
Absolutely.
interesting.
That drives me
And
nuts.
actually, one of, mm,
That drives me nuts about the that
yeah,
the storylines are in their hands. They have, it's not like they don't have the talent to promote. Like you can get somebody over with packaging, with the right
mm,
packaging, with the right storylines. It's not a matter of, well, nobody's interested in the women's
yeah,
division match, so we're only going to have one. No, you could build it. I mean, look at what's going on if you with Athena and Billy Starks and that whole storyline in Ring of Honor. You could create a great storyline, and there's so much potential. Like I really thought they were going to do an Outcast versus OG's blood and guts, and I mean they were looked like they were gearing towards that. And I thought there were so many
mm,
juicy storylines you could put in that. I would have
yeah,
loved to have seen Thunder Rosa return and have to team with Britt Baker to defeat the Outcasts, because now you've got the two mortal enemies facing each other, and having to coexist to defeat the others. There's so much storyline, and and Abaddon should not be a Halloween only wrestler. She should be all year long. Such a great character, and it drives me nuts. And it does feel
Yeah.
like I love AEW, and I love wrestling, but it does seem like there is kind of an afterthought still. But to me, I see so much, and in the indie scene, I see so much
Yeah, and in
talent.
terms of yeah, and in terms of meaningful women's stories, I definitely want to give a pat on the back to RH, because for me, out of like the bigger promotions, RH is doing the best job
Mhm,
actually producing meaningful women's matches and meaningful stories for women. But what I was gonna say, so you know which video on my channel is the most disliked in the history of my channel? Remember when we had the first ever women's main event for WrestleMania?
mhm.
So I made a video after that, pretty much saying that I don't get why after this one main event we're acting like we've solved sexism, because even though it was the main event, there were I think two women's matches on the card that year, as
Mhm.
opposed to what 5 or 6 or 7 men's matches if you count or don't count the pre-show. It's like, why are we acting like we solved everything when even on that show the percentage of women's matches is critically low, and also it's literally only happened once, and I don't know why everyone's saying, well, here you've got equality. Like, no, it's just one thing. It's a step. It's a big step. It's a great step, but it's just one step. And that's the most disliked video on my channel. That's another thing. A lot of the time men don't like to hear unpleasant things about other men, because um, we all get the not all men sentiment. We all get that no one wants to be lumped together with bad people. It's never
Mhm.
pleasant. But even though not all men perpetrate sexism, all men benefit from sexism.
Mm.
And it's really unpleasant to
It's an
hear that you're
interesting point.
benefiting from this horrible thing. But instead of closing your ears and go like, oh, I know I can hear that, I'm a good one, instead of being like that, think like why you don't like being lumped with them. Maybe they're doing bad things, so maybe turn to your right, to your left, look at your friends, see if they're being toxic, see if they're saying toxic things, and maybe talk to them and be like, hey, I don't like to be lumped together with you when you say those things, so maybe
Ye
don't say them. Or if how to say, if you can't change people around you, change the people around you. Social consequences are a really big thing. Social, well, not isolation. I don't want to say isolation, because on the end of the day, we have to educate people, not isolate
Yeah.
them. But when a man is being toxic, joking about sexual assault, or joking about how women belong in the kitchen, and suddenly he loses friends, male friends, that's when he'll realize that maybe something's wrong. So what I'm saying is, social consequences to someone's actions and words are super important, and more important than any kind of consequence a woman can give you, and any kind of consequence uh, like a legal or regulated institution or organization can give you.
You're making me really think, differently, a different perspective now, like, because I think cancel culture is very dangerous, but what you're talking about is like genuine, like a genuine social penalty, which like not like shame, like not an official like let's cancel this person, get them fired, but like we have a Wednesday night wrestling group that comes over. It's my wife and my friend Shane, and we used to have another friend that would come over, but he would start saying some very just like very homophobic and kind of sexist things, and like almost in a way that he would expect us to agree with him. And it got to the point where I had to talk to him. I said, hey bud, that stuff bothers me, it bothers us. And he started getting, instead of like listening, he kind of went full tilt, and we stopped inviting him over. And but it's interesting because what you're saying, it makes me think of two sides, like, and I'm asking you what your thoughts are, because I think a lot of groups, in any group, whether it's a gender group, a race, a culture, a place, a job, like police officer versus teacher versus whatever, a lot of times we can't help it as humans. We judge a group by their worst members. But what you're saying is is it the responsibility, and maybe so, is it the responsibility of those groups to police their own, so that those worst members go, hey, you're making us all look bad, you need to straighten up? Is that kind of what you're saying? Because that's an interesting perspective. I haven't really looked at it that way.
It kind of is what I'm saying. Yeah. You know that saying that goes, tell me who your friend is and I'll tell you who you are? It's very much that, because a lot of the time when I express a certain, disdain with what some men say or do, someone will say, yeah, you're right. Like my friend does this and this. And I just go, like, your friend? Like I've literally had a man who I thought was very, intelligent, very, very talented, not a bad person at all, turn to me and go, like, my friend beats his girlfriend. And then just go, your friend? Like, are you still friends with this kind of person? Like, is that not a deal breaker for you? And of course, it's not fair to put the responsibility for the bad ones on the good ones. But it's always, quote unquote, the good ones complaining that, like, oh, I'm not like them, I'm different, don't lump me together. But when you don't like being lumped together with your social group that you pertain to, maybe don't turn your anger on people who are lumping you together, and instead turn your anger on, like you said, the bad parts of that group, because ultimately they're the reason that you feel like people are insinuating that it's bad to be a part of said group, and um, in terms of cancel culture, that's a very interesting and deep topic as well, because like, cancel culture is dangerous, cancel culture. I don't know if culture in that sense is even a thing, because a lot of the celebrities who have experienced getting canceled kept their career and kept their income and kept their position in the world. Like, they haven't really been affected as much as the fans on the internet make it seem. And um, I've been in a smaller scale, but I've been, like, in the shoes of people who get canceled, because I've had, like, a couple times people be very outraged with something I said on the internet. And one of those times was for sure a misunderstanding more than anything, because I just so happened to release an interview with a wrestler who got outed as an abuser the next day. So at the time of releasing the interview, I didn't know, and people just didn't really look at the timestamps at the time, because everyone's scared and everyone's sad and everyone's
Yeah.
confused, and it's very valid. And they just saw, the video on my page, and they want to be, wow, well, you're platforming an abuser. And I go online 2 hours later, and I'm like, oh my god, I had no idea. So I ended up taking down the video and, like, well, not apologizing, because I don't think, like, I did anything, but saying that, like, oh, hey, like, I'm sorry to whoever I made uncomfortable by not maybe doing deeper research on the person, or maybe not reacting fast enough.
Mhm.
And another time it was 100% my fault. I said something about men's mental health that was very insensitive, which I realized later, because I have the benefit of women in my mind. So the way I worded whatever I said was disrespectful to men who struggle with mental
Mhm.
health. And I had so many amazing people who had every reason to just block me and just tell me to, do whatever with my
Yeah.
life and not ever talk to me again. Instead, they came to me as friends, and instead they talked to me and educated me. And I obviously took the post down, and I apologized, and I donated to a men's mental health organization. And it's something that still haunts me in a way, and it's something that whenever people disagree with me, or whenever people want to express they dislike me, they have the screenshot tucked away and they just post it under my tweets. And it's a consequence of my actions, and it's healthy to experience the consequences of your actions sometimes, and work on yourself and try to make up for it. And I do think I have been trying to make up for it. um, and it's definitely unpleasant to have people pile on you. It's definitely unpleasant to get, like, 30 death threats in a day.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I guess cancel culture is bad. But ultimately, whatever a lot of people call cancel culture is just consequences of your words, of your actions. And sometimes, in my personal opinion, they should be harsher than they even are right now.
Wow, it's interesting because, like, there's so much you can there's so much you can really dissect with that. It's like on one side, there's the whole forgiveness factor. Like, is what's the statute of limitations on redemption? If and like is their own regret a thing? Like, for example, if you met 15-year-old me, you'd want nothing to do with me because I had such a skewed view of the world. I have such a compared to now. I had such a different concept. And a lot of it was was the culture I was raised in at the time. And yet now I'm a completely different person. And there's people that in their past have said things or had misunderstandings,
Hmm.
but I go back to like Daryl Davis. If you're familiar with Daryl Davis, he was a blues musician who would tour with like James Brown and other famous acts. And he would often, just like the wrestlers would, he would road trip to gigs. And a lot of times he would travel with other band members. And there was one particular road trip where he traveled with a white guy who turned out to be a member of the KKK, and they had this long drive, and instead of getting in arguments, whatever, he just started asking him questions and had this long discussion, and he never went hostile with it. He just asked him, why do you believe this way? What makes you think this? By the time they returned from their road trip, the KKK member, he turned in his robe and hood and denounced the KKK. And to this date, Daryl Davis has collected over 200 robes and hoods from members of the KKK. And to me, that's an example of like that, how like what you do with your advocacy is communication and getting other people's stories, and really kind of getting us to undersee each other for the humans that we are. I think there should be a lot of room for, like, you're you made one tweet that you regret. That should not define you. Yes, we're responsible for our actions, but that totally shouldn't define you because of all the positive things that you're doing. And I also think, kind of to quote Emerson, he trust thyself, every heart vibrates to an iron string. I don't think you made that tweet to be malicious. You made that tweet because from your perspective, that's how you saw it. And then you saw a different perspective, maybe shifted your point of view, or saw how it could have come across that way. So it, on one hand, there's that, but then there's also the part about, we've got to make sure that we as humans kind of police our own. Once we have our the emptiest cans make the most noise, they tend to be the ones heard. So when these trolls, these very negative people, are making these very uncalled for comments, it is kind of our responsibility, at least kind of from your perspective, that we let them know, and that there is some kind of social, that we socially as the human race do not accept that negativity. And so it's kind of interesting, like, where I guess where I'm coming from is, where is that line between forgiveness and redemption versus, hey, you're not, this is not acceptable, your behavior is not acceptable.
Yeah, one thing I absolutely agree with, like you said, like say me at 15 years old, I was also a completely different person. Like one thing I absolutely agree with is that a person should not be defined by what they said or thought when they were a teenager, when they were a child, and when they lived in a very different world. So even like 10 years ago, or even more, like 10, 20, 30 years ago, like, right, the world was a different place, and there were different boundaries of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And if anything, it's a good thing that now we're more progressive as a society. But yeah, absolutely. Like at 15 years old, like I was way more like misogynistic than I am right now. I maybe made some inappropriate jokes, and I even actually made a video about it on my channel, which is super old, from like when I first started YouTube, talking about how I used to be misogynistic in a way because I would repeat whatever grown respected people around me would say. Because when you're a child, that's what you do. When you're a child, you go to an adult, you ask them what's right and what's wrong, and they tell you. And a lot of the time it takes you years, if not decades, to unlearn that and to
Mm.
realize what actually right and wrong, you know. And as much as it's not black and white, I do think some things are black and white. And for me, like, and for a lot of people around me, I just feel like unlearning is sometimes harder and more important than learning. There's a lot of things that we have to unlearn that have been instilled into us since our childhood. But one thing though, like the story about the KKK member who quit after the car ride, it's definitely a beautiful story. But one thing that I really believe in is that the oppressed don't owe the oppressor
Mm.
education. Like
Mm.
the oppressed don't owe the oppressor the labor of educating them. For me, like at one point when I got to like a certain number of followers, subscribers, when I got like a certain exposure, right, I had to make a proactive decision to stop explaining to people, to stop explaining feminism to people,
Mhm.
because it was taking me so much energy every single time, and it was making me so emotional every single time. But I was like, well, if that's something I believe in and that's something that I want to promote, so if this person is in my replies goes like, but what about this and this, I have to explain to them. No,
Yeah.
absolutely not. I even actually, yeah, made the video like maybe 2 years ago where I explained why I don't talk about feminism to individual people anymore, because there's just, you know, there's only so much emotional labor that you can provide, and there's only so much energy and mental capacity that you have as a person. I absolutely shifted my focus and I concentrated on making videos, making posts, making public
Mhm.
talks, making pieces of content or pieces of information that you can come and consume without necessarily latching on to me and putting me in a position where we're having a 2 hour conversation where I'm defending my uh, integrity as a human and defending my equal rights as a human, while you are going like, okay, but what about this? But what about that? Okay, I don't know. Maybe I'll consider that you deserve equal rights. Like that's just not a position that I want to be in ever again. Uh, so even though it is a beautiful story, yes, and a lot of people will emphasize and a lot of people maybe will shift their perspective if they sit down and talk to a real person who has experienced whatever they're perpetrating, yes, definitely. But don't expect the person who represents in the press group to sit down and baby you and educate you every single time. Like that's just not how it works, and that's just not something that, you know, that should be happening, because it's just not fair.
I that's you what you said something that you really it's I'm digesting it. The comment about the oppressed doesn't owe an explanation or to the oppressor. And I'm not I'm not disagreeing or agreeing with that, because that's a new little thing way to look at it. I do think that communication is necessary, and I think that it's much better than, meeting hate with hate. But you make a really good point, and from your perspective of how, the whataboutisms that people throw at you, like, oh, okay, I guess you might need, equal rights. Yeah, I mean, that's that's interesting. I do think, though, it is on all of us as humans to kind of listen to each other and communicate and try to hear that other side, because I think it goes the other way too. It's like, we want to understand how we get to this stuff if we want to coexist. But you do make a very valid point that the oppressors don't owe, or the oppressed don't owe an explanation to the oppressors. That's really that really makes me look at another perspective in there, and I thank you for that. That's that there's Yeah, that's that. I'm gonna have to really chew on that one. That's good stuff. Um, so thank you again for joining me on this, and I apologize for the technical issues, but I think the gremlins are
It's just
trying to.
something that for me, I just said like a little, yeah, can I just add a little thing? It's just that with explaining people to people, for me, it was something that I had to realize, and that I really want other girls to realize, especially younger girls,
Mhm.
because a lot of the times we would think that like, okay, this guy's being sexist, but he just doesn't understand. He just needs an explanation. I can fix him, you know, that kind of
Mm.
thing. And no, you can't. Like a lot of the times you can't, because, and a lot of the times it's not your job to do that, because we live in the age of information. If they were actually willing to learn, if they were actually curious, if they were actually confused, they would go on the internet and they'd Google it. Or another thing that I always say that I always appreciate and I'm always open to is when a guy comes to me with a specific question. Like, hey, I tried to research on this topic, but I don't understand this specific thing. Can you explain? Or can you direct me to a source? Or can you direct me to an article? That is an amazing question to ask. I absolutely appreciate it. Anyone, any person in the world, if they were to come to me with a question of that sort, I will absolutely answer. Thing is that
Mhm.
happens almost never. Uh,
Mm.
and another thing is like, we as women, when we try to explain feminism to men, we are talking about our lives. We are talking about a lot of issues that directly affect us. Like
Mhm.
catcalling directly affects me. Abortion legislation directly affects me. Like women's rights in the workplace directly affect me. So we're talking about something that's an issue like in our daily life, and something that makes us feel unsafe or makes us feel uncomfortable or makes us feel in any other way, unhappy and unfulfilled. But for a lot of guys, when they talk to us about that, it's not something that's directly an issue to them. So for them, it's a theoretic discussion. So we have a person for whom it's a theoretic discussion versus a person for whom it's their livelihood. And a lot of the time, I had this like just heartbreaking emotional conversations with men about how, like, look, this is why women feel this way. And they would turn around and be like, well, thank you, I had a great time having this discussion with you. No, like this is not this is not how
I hope
this is supposed to go.
I hope
So
you
what
don't
I'm
think
trying to
that's what
say
I
is,
was
like,
doing.
if
No,
you
I
want to go and explain to this person, if you want to have this conversation, if you feel like it's important to you, if you feel like that's going to make you feel better, absolutely go have it. Yeah. But if but it's not what I want young girls to understand is absolutely not your job to do it. If they're confused, if they're annoying you, if they don't want to go research, just don't waste your time. That's what I'm saying.
no, it makes very good sense. And again, I wasn't trying to cut the interview off because of that. No, I really it's a different perspective. And you're right. These are things that the things you're bringing up directly affect you. I look at it from the lens of I've actually experienced situations where I've been people assume things about me because of how I look and or because of my background and find out they're incorrect. But it's kind of like you make another good point about that we're in the super information age. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think it's on all of us as humans to really be students of critical thinking, to really do the work, to really try to understand each other. And I appreciate your explanation there. That I think that it's a long and hard road for us to understand each other. But I think that when, like, for example, when you bring stories out of other people, we get to know the full person, and not just they're not just a one statistic in a group. They're the individual. And I feel like every individual has a unique story to tell, and I really appreciate what you're doing with that. And Xenia, I really appreciate you putting up with all the technical gremlins today, and I really appreciate you taking your time. Hopefully, we can chat again when my internet or whatever's going on doesn't take a complete dump on me. But I hope you keep continuing to do what you're doing. I'm looking forward to spotting you in the crowd in wrestling in at wrestling events, and I'm excited for your future, and I think that you're doing very, very good stuff. You're making a lot of people think. You're really giving me some stuff to kind of chew on for before I my next podcast, and I really appreciate that. Is there any final words of advice to anybody out there on mental health or anything at all?
I'm definitely like not a mental health professional to be talking about
Mhm.
that, but I guess I'll say two things. So one thing is just something super general, but like, be kind to each other, not at the expense of your integrity, but I see so many people going out of their way to be unkind. Like,
Yeah.
we live in such a scary, intense world, such a scary, intense life. So it's, we're dealing with enough. Everyone's dealing with enough to deal with someone being proactively unkind. And another thing, it's just in the light of like how my life has been lately, and what I've seen from people. Um, and it's actually like something that I've kind of been trying to live by. So for me, it's wrestling, but for different people, we have different passions, right? We have different
Mhm.
things that make us happy that we want to pursue, right? For me, it's wrestling. So for me, it's no matter how much drama there is, no matter how much people talk badly about you, no matter how you dislike someone or they dislike you, or you like someone and they don't like you, or you broke up with someone, or something happened. No matter what happens, don't let anyone take that thing away from you. For me, it's don't let anyone take wrestling away from me. I've been in wrestling for 5 years, and because of human nature, there's obviously always some drama. There's always something going on. But I always tell myself, whatever it is, don't let them take wrestling away from you. Because
Mhm.
ultimately, you're doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. It's something that makes me happy, and it's something that I can't imagine my life without. So just because you have a human versus human problem, don't let that human take your passion away from you. That's just something
Don't
that's helped me through situations, and that I would hope would help other people through situations too.
don't let them steal your sunshine. Don't let them take away what brings you joy. And Xenia, chatting with you has brought me joy. Thank you so much for your time, your patience, and I look forward to speaking with you again. And maybe we'll run into each other at a show at some point. So for Xenia, the XDT, I'll have all her socials and everything at the bumper. This has been Mind Runner with Mental Health Mondays, and take care of yourself. Be kind to each other, and try to listen to each other. Have a Always remember, you are not alone. Catch full episodes every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific.